something was wrong with AJ. I didn't know he was deaf. I knew something was wrong. I took him to be tested, and I sat in the booth, and they had those really loud sounds coming, and he responded to none of them. And I wanted to cry. I didn't know what that meant. Even then, I still didn't know what that meant. I'm such a naive person as far as deafness goes. I had no information on the meaning of being deaf, and it didn't occur to me that they couldn't just fix that.
Sir, you may want to reach for the ear protectors, the red headset.
I like one that the kids can hold. And
Who's deaf? He just took me in his office and told me that my son was deaf, and that I could forget higher education, and that we would try hearing aids, but that his loss was so severe that the chances of them being successful just weren't very realistic. And he also said to me, which was the worst thing I've ever heard, was that he would never hear my voice. So what went through my mind was that my son would never hear me say, "I love you."
Although Laurie was discouraged from trying to teach her deaf son to talk, she decided to try the oral option with AJ. When she first made this decision, she was unaware that she lived less than 10 miles from the world-renowned pioneer of teaching spoken language to deaf children, Dr. Daniel Ling.
Everything I was being told was going against my inner belief that my son, of course, would learn and would hear and would be fine. But we just had to then make our own choices to go with what was best in our hearts, and we were never reinforced until I met you. You know, I mean, I would say, I talked to AJ, he hears me over there, they would say that is not possible. You looked at AJ's audiogram, you hadn't even met him, and you looked at how he was aided, and you said, oh, he can have full range of speech, he'll be just fine.
That's not a pelican, that's a flamingo. No, but you've got a hyena. Yeah, a hyena, but what's this one? It's a flamingo.
Flamingo.
No, flamingo.
Flamingo.
Flamingo, yeah.
This one.
Yeah, if you use information pattern, you break it up.
That's pelican.
Those are pelicans. Those are pelicans, but this is not. This is a. What is that one?
Flamingo.
That's right, a flamingo. You almost remember
This
it.
is a cow.
For 50 years, Dr. Daniel Ling has been teaching deaf children to speak. His story is one of compassion, commitment, and also of controversy. Ling is one of a dozen or so personalities throughout history known for their contribution to teaching deaf children to talk. He even bears a striking resemblance to his most well-known Scottish predecessor, Alexander Graham Bell. The man behind the telephone was also the inventor of such creations as the hydrofoil, sonar, the phonograph, and early air conditioning, to name just a few. But when asked his profession, Alexander Graham Bell would always answer that he, above all else, was a teacher of the deaf. Like his father before him, Bell was devoted to teaching the deaf to speak through practicing lip reading and using audio aids. In fact, he developed the telephone as another device to help the deaf to hear. At the Milan Conference on Deaf Education in 1880, Bell tried to influence educators to accept the oral approach to teaching the deaf to speak, despite sentiments in the field which supported manual or sign language. While most remember Alexander Graham Bell for his many inventions, among the deaf, he is at the center of a controversy within the community which persists to this day. In fact, throughout his professional career, Daniel Ling has encountered the same resentment from the signing community that Alexander Graham Bell faced in his day. Chris Canopic is the executive director of the Ontario Association of the Deaf, a bastion of deaf culture. He is outspoken in his opposition to Daniel Ling and to all he represents.
People such as A.G. Bell and other people who were strong auditory supporters, like Dr. Ling, changed the focus of education to one that looked at our ability to hear. And I think that we have, from that point on, had to fight to say ASL is a language that we can use in education, that we can learn English and French as well, but that this is our language and this is our access. But the medical profession has influenced society in terms of what is the best approach towards deaf people. I think that if society listened to us, we could show society that we can do anything except hear.
I think that change is always unpleasant for many people. The change is, however, a very natural one. One didn't have airplanes to fly in, one had boats. Airplanes took the place of the rails and the ships. It isn't necessary to be bogged down in working in a 19th century model, keeping deaf children away from society, shutting them off in a smaller world of their own with less opportunity. There's no need to do that anymore. The need is, some people may feel that there's a need and they are welcome to stay there. There are many sects in the world that want to live without any of the modern conveniences, but that's not true for most people, and it's not true for most hearing impaired children.
I think Dr. Ling and a slew of other audiologists, medical professionals, do at times play with deaf children. It becomes experimentation on a deaf child. Okay, this method didn't work. Let's try another one on these kids. Let's try this approach then. And again, what happens is it often is detrimental to the language development of these children. We know, we're deaf adults, we've been through it all. I've had the, you know, all day stuck in the chairs while people were trying to force me to speak and to say consonants over and over again, vowels all over and over again. Say the word ice cream, say the word airplane. You know, today, I don't know how many years later is it, 30 years later, I still remember those drills. Now, I go out into the community, I'm a very active and involved deaf person, and, you know, my vision of the world has expanded dramatically. I want to see deaf children not have to go through the process that I went through. I don't think we need to be experimenting on deaf children. That's just another form of oppression.
They had to go to bed. It was really cold outside. In the morning. Well, let's see, in the morning, all day long. Sounds like they were fooling around, jumping on the tram.
Consider the case of Diane Mlinarik, who was born profoundly deaf. Her life defies the statistics.
Growing up, I didn't know many hearing impaired. I just at the oral school when I first started, but I was too young to remember them. And I have a sister who's not hearing impaired, so I used to hang around with her, and being mainstreamed into a regular school, I was brought up like just as if I had regular hearing. And I never felt any different or isolated at all, because I've had some great friends that have always understood what I was going through.
I was playing with Heather and we made a plant.
Is that what you've brought and that you have on your desk? Is that the plant? Hold it up and let's see.
When Diane was diagnosed, her parents brought her to the Montreal Oral School to become part of Dr. Ling's groundbreaking infant intervention program. It was the first program of its kind in Canada, fitting babies with hearing aids and having them learn to listen. This was part of a revolutionary approach to helping deaf children, which would become known as the Ling method of auditory verbal therapy. Diane is one of thousands of deaf children whom Dr. Ling started on the path to speaking. Among his students are lawyers, accountants, architects, business people, teachers, all living in the mainstream of the hearing world. Diane is a registered nurse.
Yeah, it's a specially adapted stethoscope that has a volume control here. And see, what they did is cut the stethoscope. So I don't use the ears. I just put this around my neck. And there's a tubing here that attaches right to the hearing aid.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this part here attaches right on the hearing aid. So I just like plug it in.
Yeah, it's great.
And then I can hear all the lung sounds and
Am
take
I
blood
alive?
pressure. I can hear your heart, yeah. It's beating.
Great.
Today, in his mid-70s, Dr. Ling continues to travel around the world teaching and consulting with families and professionals. When at home with his wife Jane on Vancouver Island, he pursues his other passions.
Everything that I eat is basically organic. We have natural growing stuff in the garden. We have sheep that feed on beautiful pasture. We catch salmon that live in the West Coast, unpolluted ocean. I came from a poor farming family during the Depression, in the early 1930s. I was born in 1926, and so all of my childhood was, I grew up during the Depression. By the time I was 22 and had gone through the Royal Air Force with training as a radar communication engineer, I was able to enter university with a great deal of background. My first love was music, and I qualified with a major in music teaching, music education. But in the course of working on the practicum, I met a hearing impaired child, took an interest in how he could work and learn, and then decided to study at the University of Manchester under Professor Sir Alexander Ewing. I took a job, first of all, in a school, and I was very keen on music. An education authority called the Reading Education Authority, this is Reading in Berkshire, England, wanted someone to set up classes in regular schools and work towards integration of hearing impaired children. So when I had this opportunity to work in Reading, I took it. I was getting to the point where I said, I do not want to work in schools for the deaf. I don't think they're an effective method of educating hearing impaired children. They teach children to be deaf.
It was at Reading in the 1950s that the groundwork for Dr. Ling's approach to teaching deaf children got its start. Here, young Mr. Ling began to apply and develop the principles of integrating deaf children with their hearing peers, of honing listening skills and adapting hearing technology. These would become the cornerstones of the auditory verbal approach to educating deaf children, for which he has become known.
And I want you to listen to it very carefully. I'm going to stop it. Well, the first children I saw was a child called Eva. And with Eva, she was 5 years old, and she was being considered for commitment to a home for mental patients because she wasn't talking, and she just kicked and screamed. And I saw the child and looked at her, and it was in the days when people were not really aware that deafness could cause the type of problems that Eva had. But having been trained, I happened to see this child, and I said, "Are you sure that she's not deaf?" And they looked at me in surprise and said, "Do you think she might be?" And I said, "Let me try, let me check." And I checked with Eva and found that she was, in fact, very profoundly deaf.
When Mr. Ling started to teach her and took her in his hand, you know, I can say, you could see improvement, you know, and she could communicate with just hearing aid, you know, this hearing aid what used to be, you know, with this, yes. And you know, we were pleased because she always, you know, was get better and better.
Now, can most of the children speak when they come to you?
Some of them, most of them could. One of them couldn't. Eva couldn't. Perhaps you'd like to hear her. Eva, come over here, please. That's right. Now, I've got a recording of Eva as she could speak about a year after she came. Perhaps you'd like to hear it. Yes. Eva, listen to yourself.
I'm in home. Busha. Cat lazy. Man lazy. Car. Put cat car. Put cow. Put the cat. Rat. Put the cat. Car. Put the put the cat. Say no. Yes.
Have you got a cat now?
No.
Who's got a cat?
My friend.
Who's that?
Wendy.
Wendy. What were you telling me about Wendy's cat?
Wendy says to me, would you like to see the prosecution on Saturday?
Oh, when was that? Are you going?
On Saturday.
You are going on Saturday? Yes. Has the kitten got its eyes open?
No, not yet.
Well, thank you, Eva. Very carefully. I'm going to stop it like I always do, and I want you to tell me... It was the beginning of my work in auditory verbal education because it had become clear to me that if you could overcome deafness, the thing that was limiting the child's opportunity to any significant extent, then you would improve the child's chance of learning language normally. Eva died. She contracted a disease that ate away her muscles. She died, and I was very upset. You learn from suffering and as well as from joy. And what Eva taught me while she was learning her language and growing has stood me in good stead throughout the whole of my professional life, because one learns from one's students just as much as they learn from you.
Developments in hearing technology over the past generation have revolutionized the entire field of working with the deaf. Powerful digital hearing aids, or the latest high-tech instrument called the cochlear implant, makes sound available to more and more deaf people.
I guess the most simple way to describe the power of hearing in physiological terms is to say that we're neurologically wired to learn speech and spoken language through hearing. It requires particular parts of the brain in order to function as a hearing person. You have to have the ears to hear, or cochlear implants or hearing aids to assist. You have to have a good, clear perceptual pattern, the best possible perceptual pattern through hearing. But you don't hear with your ears, you hear with your brain. And so that sound and language are thoroughly integrated into our nervous system. There is no substitute for it. There is no substitute for hearing.
In a normally hearing person, sound passes from the auditory channel through the outer ear to the middle ear, past the eardrum, and finally to the inner ear, the cochlea, where tens of thousands of tiny hair cells transmit the sound through the auditory nerve to the brain. These hair cells in a person with a sensory neural hearing loss are damaged. The damage results in hearing loss of different degrees, moderate, severe, or profound, and in some children, even total. A regular hearing aid can only amplify the sound that is received by the normal structures in the inner ear. In a totally deaf or profoundly deaf person, the hair cells are so damaged that adequate speech and sound information cannot get through. The cochlear implant, with its array of electrodes surgically implanted into the inner ear, or the cochlea, bypasses the damaged hair cells and lets the auditory nerve send sound directly to the brain.
Dana, Tamar.
What?
We're going to take off the implant, okay? Ready? Dana. Dana.
Can you hear me?
Dana, can you hear me? Tamar. Tamar.
No, good.
Hello. Woo! Girls. Okay. Good. Here, Tamar.
Tamar.
E. Dana.
What?
How are you?
Fine.
Tamari.
Tamari.
I love you.
I love you.
Dana.
Yes.
I love you.
I love you too.
But look at me. Just shut your eyes for a minute. E. Good. Absolutely fabulous. You know, there's just no way. He can hear everything now. Good. Right.
Some critics of the cochlear implant have described this operation as creating bionic people, imitations of the real thing. But is it any different from prosthetic devices to help people walk, or a pacemaker to help the heart keep its rhythm?
If I break a leg, I want my leg fixed. If I lose an arm, I want an artificial limb so that I can function as well as normal. And if I'm deaf, I want to wear hearing aids. In fact, I do wear hearing aids. And now, as an older person, I didn't always, but I want to live as normal a life as possible. There are far more opportunities in the world that are open to people who can talk and communicate with anyone. Nowadays, the technology is available to help children learn normal speech and language. It's so much so, in fact, that maybe 90% or more of hearing impaired children, whatever their degree of hearing loss, could be educated through auditory verbal strategies that would allow them to develop language in a very normal way and to participate in life in the hearing world.
Why did you put the snakes with the elephants?
Oops.
Yeah, oops.
The elephant.
Yeah.
Sorry, I tricked you.
Did you trick me?
Really? I'm sorry, Mom.
Okay.
An interesting jungle.
Yes.
Have swimming animals.
Lots of fish. What kinds do you have there?
Alligator, hippo, alligator. Where's the yellow hippo? Oh, here he is.
Technology is one component in the successful oral rehabilitation of a deaf child. It is important, but it is not the single criterion for successful speech and language. It is the approach to therapy which complements the technology, emphasizing the importance of hearing in order to learn to speak. Auditory verbal therapy has been Daniel Ling's major contribution for half a century.
Oh! Oh! That's why Santa says, ho, ho, ho. He doesn't say ho, ho, ho. He says, oh, 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 when the children pull the beard. He does. What do you want?
One of the children learning and living Daniel Ling's approach is Rachel Drisdall. She is profoundly deaf. When Rachel's deafness was first diagnosed, professionals told her parents to learn sign language quickly so that they would be able to communicate with their deaf daughter. Linda and Jules Drisdall studied their options before making a decision and decided first to try to teach Rachel to speak and to listen. Their research led them to Dr. Daniel Ling, who, as they discovered, also lived on Vancouver Island. Despite the 5-hour drive from Gold River to Daniel Ling's home, monthly visits for consultation became part of the family routine.
Look, that's the red flag. So push the flag down. No, push it down. That's a girl. Look.
How about you make a hot dog? Dad's going to make a dog and you make a hot dog.
I'm going to make a sausage dog. I try as much as possible to keep in the background and interact, but much less than the parents, because I want to see how the parents interact, and I want to help them see what to look for and what to listen for. And you'll see as we go that this is what's happening. She's talking about faces now.
You make a face. I do everything wrong. She has to redo everything I do. You want me to make it smooth? Here, I'll smooth it out.
What do you mean you do everything wrong?
Like if I do eyes, then she has to start again.
Oh, okay then. No, I think you're doing extremely well. Nope. Oh,
okay,
I see.
you make a face. Wow. Oh, it's a happy one. Oh, who's that?
Where? Go on.
Where's the eyebrows, Rachel?
Wow.
Wow.
That's something. She's really got phenomenally good receptive language.
How about her hair?
Wow, that's good.
Curly hair.
Did anybody tell you you're doing the right thing?
we just assume we are.
Yes, you are. There's a whole...
No. Who made that?
You know, while she's being fairly quiet, I'd like to tell you that what I would predict is that within a few months, she will have some extraordinarily good speech patterns. I think she's got so much perception right now, she's got so much comprehension, that it's going to start bubbling over into production. And I think within 6 months, you're going to find that she's going to be talking very, very much more fluently. Happy birthday to you. Now blow out the candles.
Blow out the candles.
One breath.
Oh. Wow, that's syrup. See, that's the one you like. This is the one you like. That's syrup. Oh, that's some different syrup. See? That's syrup. You like that one? So good, yeah.
Hearing impaired children can come to any family. Interestingly enough, the majority of hearing impaired children come to parents of who are themselves normally hearing.
You want it tighter? Just one tighter? Oh, it's pretty tight. There. What happened there? Did you get an owie there?
Oh, she's too sad.
Wait for me.
Rachel have long hair?
Yeah, it's long.
It's so long, I know.
How old are you now, Rachel?
I'm 4. I'm 4 too!
You're twins! You're 4 together!
What normally hearing parents can do is do the thing they do well, and normally, which is talk. They don't have to learn a different language like sign language. They don't have to learn different ways of doing things. They have to enhance what they do. They have to learn to talk clearly and close to the child in a nice, quiet voice, using lots of intonation patterns and mother reason, be normal, and learn how to ensure that the hearing aids work or the cochlear implant is working, and doing normal things. And the more abnormal your treatment of hearing impaired children, the more abnormal the product is going to be.
The Drisdolls were forced to leave Gold River when the pulp and paper mill where they worked was closed. They moved to Toronto to be close to Linda's parents. Rachel continues her auditory verbal therapy at the North York General Hospital program. Warren Estabrooks, the program director and a close colleague of Daniel Ling, works with Rachel in an auditory verbal program.
Sky at night.
Maybe it's owl.
It's not an owl. Hey, Rachel, come here. Ask Nana if she likes pizza.
You like pizza?
Do you?
Do you like pizza?
Yes. The moon is up in the sky at night. Do you know what's up in the sky in the daytime?
Sun.
The sun. That's right. And the sun is very hot. And the opposite of hot is hot and cold. And some other opposites are like up and down. And turn the light off.
Light on.
Turn the light on and go away.
Go away. Come back.
Come back. Good listening.
Daniel Ling visits the Drisdoll family when passing through Toronto on his circuit of lectures or workshops about auditory verbal therapy.
We have to pick it. We have to say goldfish. We pick that.
What she's saying is not related to deafness.
Yeah.
What she's doing is related to development. Now, when did she get her implant? How old?
She was between 2.5 and 3.
That's right. So she's only had the implant for a couple of years.
Yeah, just 2 years.
2 years. Now, you see, that means that she's now... I saw her at her last birthday when she was 4.
Yes.
And how old are you now?
5.
5, yes. And so what you've got is someone who's, in 2 years, has acquired a lot of language. This language is as good as or better than a normal 2-year-old. And think of her listening age.
Yes.
And so if her language is not related to, language delay is not related to her hearing now, because she's hearing everything with the implant, then you know that it's just a normal language delay, and she's going to outgrow all of those very, very quickly. You'll find that the yittle yam, for example, she'll be saying Mary had a little lamb perfectly normally, again within 6 months, because, these are normal processes, and what you're facing now is not a delay due to deafness. It's a delay due to late diagnosis and treatment.
Right.
But it's going to be normal.
I put butter first.
And then the ham comes next. Okay. Then what are you going to do?
I'm going to close it.
You're going to what? Oh, you're putting that. Where are you going to put the sandwich?
In a plate.
On a plate, okay. You know, it's interesting, the last time I saw her was her last birthday. And now I told you that 6 months ahead she'd be talking. And I was predicting, and you can see how sure you could be.
That's right.
Because she is.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
a world of difference.
will you believe now that I'm going to predict something else?
What?
You're going to find it very hard, because to believe that sometime soon you're going to say, how can I get her to stop?
Much of Ling's approach to teaching results from his love of music. It is his interest in acoustics which has allowed Ling to develop his other interests, combining his passion for teaching the deaf with his love of sound.
You listen very carefully to a piece of wood like this, and you hear the sound. It's extremely resonant wood. And so you would only make violins from wood that sounds exactly how you want it to sound. The rubbing of the wood tells you what sound you're going to get from a violin. You would never, ever think of building a violin unless you looked at the wood and listened to it very carefully. It's got to look beautiful, which this does. Look at the flare on that. Of course, it's not finished, it's not polished. But I do all of the varnishing like this because when you are making a plate like this, as you carve it, the sound changes and until it becomes very thin. It's not a very good one, so I'll snap a piece of it off for you, and you can see how very, very thin it is. Actually, it's about 2.7 millimeters. And one has to have an absolutely perfect plate in order to make a great violin. And this one is now ready. I'm dying to play it. I can't wait for another 3 days. This is a bone conduction vibrator that's used to test hearing. And one puts it here behind the ear, and I can hear it now through the bones of my skull. This is a technique that I use to age a violin artificially. It isn't really artificial. I just put this vibrator on the bridge and leave it 24 hours a day until it's had 500 hours of playing. When it's had 500 hours of playing, it sounds like a violin that has been played for 20 years. It's really beautiful. People who play it before and after the vibration can hear a vast difference. And I recorded it and I've measured what happens. So this is one of the things that I've published in this area. It's a full 14-inch. And I set out to structure a speech teaching system that became widely known as the Ling system. And it was, interestingly enough, based on my notions of music. If you can take a violin and draw a bow across a string, which is what all violinists have to do to start with, you get nothing much more than a scratch. Well, when you start from scratch, which you really do with violins, and go on through systematic development to be able to play the Tchaikovsky or the Beethoven concertos, then you realize that logical steps in development could read as logical steps in the development of speech. So that if a child can't say a G, how can you go about getting it? What are the steps that underlie this? What are the steps that you can go on to take to integrate it into everyday speech and language? Stam.
Stam. Stam. Stam. Stam. Stam. Stam.
Come, this is easy. This is easy. This is easy. Look, okay, you don't even have to do it with this. It's easy. Look, this one says, let's get your sleeve up. This one says, tam.
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 Tam. Tam.
Tam, ופה הוא אומר תם. סתם.
סתם, 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 סתם.
זה, אמרת שזה יפה.
That's all there is to it.
סתם, סתם,
And he likes doing it. You see, once he succeeds, he'll like doing it.
Working closely with children and their parents, Daniel Ling, as headmaster, developed the Montreal Oral School for the Deaf in the 1960s into a living laboratory for children and speech professionals. The reputation of auditory verbal education spread beyond the walls of the school and was implemented in centers outside Montreal.
Take your tongue back. Your tongue. Out there like that. I don't want it out there. I want to just... Where's my tongue gone? It went. Okay, nose.
Nose.
Yeah, it's coming. Nose. Quick.
Nose.
Ling went on to serve as the Dean of the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at McGill University. During this time, he and his colleagues trained an entire generation of professionals in the auditory verbal approach. Daniel Ling published hundreds of research articles and wrote the definitive textbooks still used today in training speech and language pathologists around the world.
The greatest thing that he gave to the graduate students here at McGill was he imbued them with the passion that he has for teaching deaf children to listen and to speak. So he taught us not only the theory of what's behind listening and speaking and language, but gave us the skills to implement specific techniques and then the confidence to go further.
It was a great time. We had lots of great students, many of whom have gone on to PhD positions and have gone all over the world. But there's nothing left now of the program here at McGill other than a picture and I think a few books over there.
He was 20, 30 years ahead of his time teaching children when we didn't have the hearing aids that we have today, when we didn't have cochlear implants.
Well, there it is.
After Daniel Ling left McGill University, his training program for auditory verbal professionals was terminated. No similar academic program exists today anywhere. Historically, Daniel Ling is one of a handful of giants in the field of teaching spoken language to the deaf. From northern Canada to South America, from the Middle East to the Far East, among families with deaf children and their treating professionals, his name is a household word.
The vast majority of people are parents. Isn't that right? Hands up, parents. Yes, it's true.
30 years ago, Daniel Ling was invited by a mother of a hearing-impaired child to help bring his teaching approach to Mexico. Cristina Manriquez was a young speech therapist at the time and became one of Ling's first students. Almost 20 years ago, Cristina trained this young mother named Laura, along with her mother, in the auditory verbal method of learning to listen and to speak.
A, I, U, sh, I, sh, So she only has the low sounds, fréquence basse. And the S and the esh will never be heard by it. She cannot hear it.
Today, Laura is back at the Auditory Verbal Center in Mexico City, teaching her own hearing-impaired son to speak, and even to sing.
Most people do not realize that properly aided, the vast majority of hearing-impaired children can learn to sing in tune.
Baby, talking well, it's really in your reach, baby. Dump your throat so you'll know just how to be. But don't let's give more phonology. We can
can help your talking when we teach. Baby, conversation gets you to your feet. Baby, we can give you lots of things and speech. Baby, talking well is really in your reach. Yakety, yakety, yak.
Although Daniel Ling is at the center of the continuing controversy surrounding the rehabilitation of the deaf, a generation of families has recognized his contribution to the quality of their lives. On a recent visit back to Reading, England, where he began his professional career almost 50 years ago, Daniel Ling met with former students.
My name's Tony. I was one of Dan Ling's first pupils at George Palmer. I was from a deaf school, so I couldn't talk or didn't really speak very well. So they were on the care of Dan Ling for 3 hard years. It was grueling, and it was hard. I just hate him, you know, but I got to confess I do love him now. Then I left school with no O-level at all, nothing, no qualification, but I can talk. That was really a good start to my life, because you can go out into the world if you can talk. If I haven't been learned to listen, and though my sight got worse, yes, it would have been a different story. I wouldn't be able to cope. You know, if you can't hear, you can't see, yes, nightmare.
Tony has developed Usher syndrome, a disease which causes degenerative blindness, often associated with deafness. In addition to being deaf, Tony has become legally blind.
Lovely to see you. Have a nice Christmas.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye, Mr. Ling. Nice to see you again.
I'm Dan. Mr. Ling was my father.
Have a nice Christmas. Bye-bye then.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.
The fall of 1999, Daniel Ling received official recognition at a ceremony in Ottawa in the presence of the Prime Minister, where he became an officer of the Order of Canada.
The work of this professor has changed the education of hearing-impaired children. His groundbreaking textbook, Speech and the Hearing-Impaired Child, is regarded as a first-hand resource for speech therapy and is used internationally as a reference tool. In many centers around the world, he has helped establish new clinics, trained new teachers, and advised concerned parents on their children's special needs. Dr. Ling.
Today, less than 10% of deaf children are raised with an auditory verbal education. Political pressure by the deaf community and the consequent lack of information made available to parents have denied many families access to the auditory verbal option.
I remember being at the deaf community at the camp, and there was some grandparents coming to pick up their family who had a 4-year-old child, and they hadn't learned sign language, and they didn't have the relationship with the little child. So I feel very happy for Rachel, but even maybe more so for my mom and dad, that this is all possible for them.
I not only want my own life to be abundant, I want the people whose lives I touch also to be abundant. The parents I work with, the students I work with, the children that I work with, I want to try to help them see that life can in spite of hearing impairment, be just as abundant for them as it can be for anyone else. And in fact, often more so, because in overcoming a problem, you gain an abundance that many people are deprived of.
There's no limit to what you can do. Nothing can stop you just because you're hearing impaired.
We are so blessed. Our son will be whatever it is he chooses to be, and he will never look at me and say, "Mom, why? Why didn't you try? I've met these other kids. They're auditory, they're verbal, their parents worked really hard to make that happen." I don't ever want to have to answer that question, ever.
I don't like too much noise. Do you, Rachel?
I like too much noise.
You do?